Welcome to the All Creatures Podcast. This is Chris, and today I'm joined with author, wildlife rehabilitator, Suzie Gilbert. Hey, Suzie.
Hey, Chris. How are you?
Doing awesome. And Suzie just published another book called Unflappable, which we're going to talk about. But I think a big focus of today is to talk about her experience with wildlife rehabilitation.
Yep. I've done it for 30 years.
Yeah, it has so much experience and very excited about this one. You know, just briefly, I did some wildlife rehab back in the day with squirrels, possums, and rabbits. So I'll toss in a little bit of my experiences, you know, the 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. feedings. And
Where were you?
Stuff, right?
Where were you when you were rehabbing?
I was in South Carolina.
Okay.
So upstate. So it was the Greenville Wildlife Rescue.
Okay.
Who we were working with. Yeah. Yep. And didn't do any of the rabies vector animals, which killed me because I wanted to do raccoons really bad.
Oh, yeah. You do need a different license for that.
I know, but we did do the squirrels and the possums, and I like to think now there's hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 or 2 of them out there now because of us. So
there, yeah. And it's not too late. The raccoons are waiting for you.
Yes, one day I'll get
someday.
Yeah. So, first question, always like to ask if you can kind of give us a background. You know, I guess where you grew up, where you're living now.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Oyster Bay on Long Island of New York, state of New York. And, I always had a lot of animals when I was a kid. This was not, you wouldn't call it suburbia, but you wouldn't call it rural. Lots of horses and woods. I think I always had a sort of rescue Jones. Whenever my friends would get some new little pet and then they'd get tired of it, I would end up taking him home. And so I had a little menagerie, and I rescued dogs. I grew up riding, and I ended up with the horses that were not easily handled. And eventually I started doing parrot rescue even. Parrots, as you know, parrots are incredibly smart. And if it were up to me, it would be illegal to own them because they just take so much care, and they're so needy. They're so emotional. And if you have a single parrot, you need, they just need company. So I think I moved out of New York City. I traveled around a lot. I was in New York City when I was heading end of my 20s. And I moved to the Hudson Valley, which is this beautiful little rural spot, garrison in the Hudson Valley. And someone told me that I should go check out the Hudson Valley Raptor Center. And I had never, I liked wild birds, but I had never really had contact with them. I was not a birder. And I went to the Hudson Valley Raptor Center and just fell in love with red-tailed hawks. They were they were amazing. And then from there, all kinds of raptors. I ended up working there for 11 years. And after that, I left and I set up my own wildlife place. It was going to be a small rescue center out of my house, but it just mushroomed. I mean, anytime a rehabilitator sets limits, you can expect them to last for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I think you probably know this, Chris, right?
Yes. We can't take any more. And then a windstorm comes in, and then there's 50 squirrel babies that need homes.
That's right. No more. I'm fried. Oh, well, okay, bring them in.
Yeah. It's like, because if they can't, they may have to euthanize them. So
that's right. A lot of times this is what happens to rehabbers is if you don't take them, nobody will.
Mm-hmm.
So
is that kind of where your interest in wildlife and I guess conservation began, was working at that center?
Yes, that was it.
Awesome.
And while I was there, that's when I really started learning about, how much danger faced the wildlife all around us because,
Mm.
we'd get these birds in and you name it, and it had happened to them. They're hit by cars, they're trapped, they fly into windows, yeah, it just goes on and on. And, you want to do something about it.
Right. 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 And I guess at the beginning, for our listeners that don't fully understand, what is wildlife rehabilitation?
So if you are a sort of regular person and you're out and about and suddenly you see an injured wild creature, you know, in your driveway or, you know, in on your lawn, what do you do with it? Or if you're driving down the road and so you see some wild creature who's been hit by a car, what do you do? Where do you bring them? Wildlife rehabilitators are the people who have licenses to care for injured and orphaned wildlife. In order to do that in the US, you have to be licensed. You have to go through, lots and lots of schooling. You have to take tests. You have to be licensed by the state. And if you're doing migratory birds, you have to be licensed by the feds too. And the hoops they make you jump through are just remarkable. I mean, speaking for myself, I am just a bird rehabber. But when I took my state test, I had to know about raccoons like you, Chris. I had to know all about possums and mammals. I had to know about turtles. I had to know all species, even if I didn't intend to take care of them. Which it's a good thing because if somebody brings me a injured turtle, I can take him in. Eventually, I will pass him along to someone who specializes in turtles and really knows what they're doing. But at least I can give, the injured, whatever it is, temporary care.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete network, right? Like,
the network.
Yeah.
Yes, we are such a network. Everybody knows everybody, and that's the thing is, if I get in an injured raccoon, I need to pass him on to someone who will take him, and we all have each other's phone numbers and email addresses.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, we always. I was gonna be interested. I want to ask you about birds here in a minute.
Yep.
But I remember transporting birds down the freeway, going to the state, in South Carolina, or like I said, we didn't handle rabies vectors, so we had to take them to different rehabbers. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. I guess this would be a good time to ask this question. What should a listener do if they come across an injured bird or injured mammal? What should they do?
So if you need to get a box, get something that can contain them. If you have something like an injured hawk, you're going to need to be a little more careful because they do have talons and big beaks. But what you want to do is get a heavy pair of gloves. You want to get a box and something. You can just kind of tip the animal or bird into the box without touching him as much as you can, and put a lid on it. Make sure that there are breathing holes. Make sure that the animal can breathe. And then just contain them. Put them in a place that's warm and dark because the darkness will calm them down. And then you want to get on the phone. And you can call your local vet. If you know animal people, sometimes they will know, this is a network, so they will know of a rehabilitator in the area. You can get on the internet and you can put in the name of your state. I could type in New York State Wildlife Rehabilitators, and there should be lists there. There's a national organization called the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. And if you go on their website, they have contact info for rehabbers all across the country. And then, with luck, you'll get somebody, and then you can either they will come. Normally, they will ask you to bring the animal to them because rehabbers are so overworked. We have
Mhm.
so many animals and birds and not enough time. So once you hand them off, then your job is done and you're a hero.
Yeah. 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 It's amazing how people do care, and they do, hand those animals over. And obviously, you wouldn't recommend somebody trying to rehab them on their own.
Absolutely not. No,
Yeah.
no, no. Because people think, oh, well, here's an injured hawk. I know. I'll just feed him hamburger for a couple weeks until he feels better. And birds don't eat hamburger. There's no hamburger out there for them to catch.
Mhm.
So, they have a special. Every bird, every animal has a specialized diet, and you can go on the internet, and they will have the worst information on what to feed injured wildlife. I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot believe the instructions on the internet about how to take care of injured wildlife. You have to get a hold of a rehabber. Otherwise, the animal has no choice. They have no chance. If they're not properly cared for, they have no chance.
Yeah, it's a lot goes into it, the care of these animals. And that goes into what the training, the licenses, laws, right? If my understanding's right, especially with birds are specially protected, right?
They s- Supposedly, yes, they are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty. So it is technically it is illegal for anyone to even possess the feather of a protected bird. I mean, that's the letter of the law.
Wow, yeah.
But they just the law is for really is for the protection of the birds, and we need to keep this law strong. I mean, it's really under assault right now. This All the laws protecting wildlife are under assault in our country, but the laws are there to protect them, and it's never a good idea to keep a wild creature if you don't have the training.
Right, right. And this goes for, I mean, most countries around the world.
Yeah.
We have a lot of listeners in Australia and the UK and Europe. So I'm sure there's similar organizations and laws that protect their wildlife.
Oh, yeah. I've just, all those heartbreaking videos from Australia when everything was on fire, and those, heroic rehabbers who were just working so tirelessly and like against incredible odds. I mean, this is what happens.
Yeah, yeah. Some of those images were just horrible. It's so crazy how the world has changed since then,
I
the last few
know.
months.
I know.
Uh,
Oh, one catastrophe to another.
yeah, yeah. Knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
So all of this experience leads up to you writing this book, Unflappable. that's what that's why we have you on.
Here I
But
am.
yeah, I guess what is this what motivated you to write the story?
um, yes, part yes. Um, I should say, going up to Unflappable. Unflappable is my third book. So the
Hmm.
first book I wrote, which was published by Chronicle Books, was a children's book, beautifully illustrated, and not by me, by Sylvia Long, who's a wonderful, wonderful illustrator. And it was about a boy who moves to a new town, and he, doesn't know anybody, and he finds a woman who takes care of injured birds of prey. And so it's a story about a boy and his friendship with this woman, but also about how he learns about these birds. And I wrote it when I was at the Raptor Center, and I did it just because I wanted to raise awareness of what these birds were like, and sort of start young, start with kids. And I have no idea why I chose a children's book format, because
Yeah.
I didn't have kids at the time, and I didn't even know
Hmm.
how to write a children's book. But anyway, it turned out well. And then the book after that was a memoir, and it was after I had been rehabbing all kinds of birds out of my house for, I think I wrote it up like 8 years. I had been doing it for 8 years. I started I started my wild bird hospital and rehab center when my kids were 7 and 8, and they were helping me. And so the memoir was about my futile attempt to
Yeah.
balance raising two kids and running this wild bird hospital where, there's just birds everywhere. And it was, it was bedlam. And that was a memoir. And again, I wanted to tell the story. And I wrote it because I thought, one, it was a really good story, but also it would show people, what rehabbers do and the lengths they will go to save their animal of, bird animal of choice, whatever it is. And so, after that, Unflappable now is a novel. And I would say to any writers out there that my path of writing is not the one you should follow. Just don't do what I did. Because the idea is you pick a genre. I mean, you be a nonfiction writer, be a novel writer, be a kids book writer, just, do one thing and then you can sort of get your audience and keep going. But I kept switching. So, now I have this novel and I just, I wrote it because I was on the phone with my agent at one point and I was working on another project and I didn't really like it. I was just doing it because I needed to pay the rent. And I told him a funny rehabber story. And he said, that would make such a great novel. Why don't you write it as a novel? And I said, because I don't know how to write a novel. And he said, read Carl Hyacin. So do you know Carl Hyacin?
No. Who's that?
Carl Hyacin is he's a writer in Florida. He writes, he was a journalist in I believe Miami, someplace where, Florida, there are just no holds barred in Florida. Nope. And he writes these like real fast paced, funny comic murder mystery, throw everything in there, and they're really funny. And they were great, and so I read a couple of books of his and I thought, I know I can do this because that's the kind of story I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell like a funny, fast-paced adventure story with rehabbers. And I thought I could get the audience of people who just are not necessarily into the environment. I wanted to expand. I wanted to write a book about wildlife and rehabbers that would go mainstream. And so that's what I tried to do. I certainly didn't do it right away. Took a bunch of drafts.
Yeah. Being a writer, it's a long, hard process, right?
Oh man, yes, it is. It's not a vacation at the beach.
No, not at all. I had a couple questions. So before we go to Unflappable real quick, you talk about your day with your two children. I could only imagine. Can you just talk about what a day was like for you with all the birds? I could just imagine all the diet prep with two young children. How'd you do it?
I have no idea. I don't know how I did it, except I was much younger. I don't know. I mean, I think it was like centrifugal force. I started in the morning and I did not stop until I went to bed at night. And, it was, parts of it were really fun and cool because my kids were really into it. We lived in a house way back in the woods and they were total little muddy nature kids. And so they were just happy as clams with this. We'd get a new bird in and we'd, have all these great discussions on, how cool the bird was. And we'd look up all cool facts about it. My daughter ended up having this amazing ability to get nestling songbirds to open their beaks and eat.
Mm-hmm.
when they didn't, when they normally wouldn't want to. I mean, sometimes you get a nest full of songbirds in, and you take the hemostats or the tweezers, and you put a mealworm, you grip a mealworm with it, and you present it to the nestling songbird, and immediately they'll gape. And there are little tricks, like you can jiggle the nest so it's, it kind of feels to them like a parent bird landing on the nest, and that'll make them open their beak. Or you can kind of nudge them. There are all these tricks, but sometimes they're just traumatized little creatures, and they don't want to open their beak. And Sky, my daughter, managed to get them to do it. I mean, at one point, literally, I came in the room and she was holding a pair of tweezers and making these sort of serpentine motions above the baby bird. And then the bird opened its mouth and she put the worm in. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, remember, you used to pretend the food was an airplane, remember?"
Yeah. That's awesome. No way.
I was like,
yeah.
How could this possibly work? But it did,
Oh,
and
wow.
and then my son would help me. I'd get birds in that I just could not handle by myself. I could not hold them and do what needed to be done at the same time. For instance, great blue herons, which are, they are beautiful, strong, but they're tough birds to handle, especially if they've still got some fight left in them. And my son would put on ski goggles because you got to watch your eyes with these birds. And he'd put on the ski goggles, and he'd hold the bird, and he'd get his hand under the beak and open it properly so that I could put the tube down the bird's throat and get nutrients into him.
Wow.
So yeah, so
wasn't that hard with squirrels? I'll tell you.
No, I know.
they would tend to come and get the milk from you, and then you graduate to, I don't remember, slurry, and then just grapes, and I would cut up a bunch of little food and rodent chow and stuff. Yeah, they were easy. Possums were a little hard when they're babies.
Possums, really? Why?
Yeah.
Tell me what did you have to
get
do?
them to eat?
Yeah.
So you had to mix this special, like you said, special diets for each species, and you'd have to put their food on their nose and they'd lick it.
Really?
And so, so it took forever.
That's right.
And then baby bunnies are the worst.
Oh.
Just all-time worst because they tend to die.
Yes, that's exactly what I hear.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. You're like, no, they're so cute.
They're so cute, and they're so scared. They just have heart attacks, don't they?
They do. But I released a few of those, so they were successful.
Oh wow! Well, that's an accomplishment, raising baby bunnies.
Bunnies, they take a while. So get into Unflappable, your latest book that just came out. I guess, can you kind of give an overview for the listeners?
Yeah. So the story is Luna Burke is she's a 25-year-old wildlife rehabber from Pennsylvania. And in the beginning of the book, she's married to an incredibly wealthy Florida businessman. She's been married for 6 months. Always Florida. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, they have to start in Florida because that's as far south as you can get in the United States. So, and she's calling it quits after 6 months. She can't take the life. And so in an attempt to lure her back, her mogul husband sends his guys up to Pennsylvania to take, illegally, of course, a male bald eagle that she has worked with and who lives at a wildlife center in Pennsylvania. And he thinks this will entice her back to him. Instead, it does not go according to plan. And she manages to get an unsuspecting tech guy she's just met to help her take this bird from her husband's private zoo in Florida and put it in the back of his car in a giant animal crate. And off they go. And they're heading for an eagle sanctuary in Ontario. So they have to get from Key West to Ontario with a male bald eagle, a full-grown bald eagle in the back of their car. and it's they don't use just one vehicle because chasing them are her furious husband, of course, and the police and his bodyguards and local conservation officers, because this is illegal, and Fish and Wildlife, and then the way they do it is there's an underground railroad of wildlife rehabbers, and she goes from rehabber to rehabber because she has to stay in places that have flight cages big enough to let this bald eagle out and let him, spend the night and stretch his wings in comfort. Yeah. So all these rehabbers are helping her, and there's also there's a former Navy SEAL who's now a Panther advocate, and he keeps taking he's an ex-sniper, and he keeps taking pot shots at her husband. So everybody is, there are so many characters. Everybody's either trying to help her or trying to stop her, and it's very lively.
Yeah. It's I got about a third of the way through. I've got to finish it. I promise you I will.
I'll hold you to that.
It gripped me. It definitely gripped me. And, I anything to do with animals is just amazing. So I know our listeners will enjoy it.
Good. Well, I hope so.
But, I guess from like a wildlife perspective or wildlife rehab perspective, I guess, what are some of the things, I guess you talk about the network, but also, I guess, what can people learn about taking care of these big raptors? Because when I think of a bald eagle, gosh, we just covered them a few weeks ago for a couple months ago.
Yes, I listened to that.
Still protected. Still protected, right? I mean, still a lot of laws in place. I could imagine trying to rehab them is not easy.
No, it's definitely not easy. It's no. So that's one of the reasons there are so many characters in this book. It's because, I'm writing it as a wildlife rehabber. And so you have a big bird of prey, if this were a wild bird, a wild eagle, it could never have made a trip like this, going in and out of crates, going to strange environments and spending the night and then getting back in the crate and back in the car for 5 hours. I mean, if this were a wild bird, they would never survive a journey like that. It would be far too stressful. But with a imprinted, habituated eagle, you could get away with it. But you can't have him in the crate for more than 5 hours at a stretch. And so as I tell the story, there are all these, sort of cool wildlife facts that you learn from it. And every place they stop, the rehabber does a different type of animal. So there are, there's the seal takes care of panthers. There are, opossums. There are bats. There's songbirds. There's, every place there's a different type of wildlife, and you learn all about them. Not in a sort of pedantic way. I tried to write it that way, but people have told me that it's like really readable information that you stop for a second and you think, I didn't know that about opossums, or gee, if somebody hits a black bear with a car, how do you rehab a bear?
Bear.
What kind of what kind of setup do you need to rehab a black bear? And you get this just through reading the story. It's not like, it's not like bullet points. It's within the story.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great way to present information. You're getting entertained and learning at the same time.
Yeah. That was the goal. I was trying to show people who are not into the environment just, how cool and fun it is, and showing that people who are really into taking care of injured and orphaned wild animals tend to be kind of quirky because it's
Yeah, slightly.
it's a niche area. You
I've
know
met
this,
some
Chris.
interesting people. Yes. Oh my goodness, yes,
Yeah.
some very interesting people. They're but you gotta love them. You gotta love people that love wildlife.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah. So of all the species you worked with, are raptors the hardest, or what are some of the tougher birds that you've worked with?
I would say personally that songbirds are far more difficult than raptors
Hmm.
because they are so tiny, they're so delicate, and the first time I went from raptors to songbirds, and I'm used to these big birds that you can grab, and
Mm-hmm.
at first I was afraid to touch these songbirds because they were just so little, and luckily I had some wonderful songbird rehabber friends who showed me the ropes and taught me how to hold them and how to work with them. So I would still, even though I know how to do it, I would say that they are more difficult. Their metabolisms are so fast. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they have to eat all the time. The bigger the bird, the less often they have to eat. So just
Right.
from a time conservation point of view.
So so when you do rehab with them, do you take them from chicks and then get them to fledglings to get them to fly and release?
Um, I have done it that way.
Yeah.
Rehabbers get, if we're talking songbirds, rehabbers get
Mm-hmm.
songbirds in every stage of development. I mean, I know rehabbers who have taken in eggs.
Oh
That's,
wow.
not
Yeah.
me. No,
No, no.
that's a bridge too far for me. But yes, you sometimes you will get a nest, like an actual nest. I once took in uh, this beautifully constructed nest with 5 baby blue jays in it, and
Oh wow.
the woman saw the parent get hit by a car. It was near her house,
Mm-hmm.
and there was no other. She waited and waited because she had me on the phone, and no other parent came for the babies. They do both parents feed the babies, but nobody came. So she just brought me the whole nest with these babies in it. And so that one, for example, yes, I fed them, my kids and I fed them until they became fledglings. And once they become fledglings, they go out into the flight cage.
Mm-hmm.
And I had several different flight cages going, but flight cages are filled with branches and things to perch on. You want to put whatever they will find in their natural habitat is what you want to put in that flight cage. So leaves and sticks and pine cones and rocks and water and everything. You want them to become acclimated, and then little by little you get them self-feeding, so they'll just pick up worms and pick up seeds or whatever they eat by themselves. And you want to make sure they don't depend on you for food when you actually release them. And then you have to worry about imprinting. You want to make sure that they have siblings, even if they're not blood siblings. If I get
Mm-hmm.
a single orphaned robin in, I call around and say, "Who's got robins? Can I give someone a robin? Or if I have to, I'll take your robins."
Yep, yep, yep.
So
Yeah.
just to make sure that they know what kind of birds they are.
That's interesting. So it's almost training. I mean, I know we had the release cage with squirrels.
Yeah,
Possums are easy. You just get them big enough and let them go.
yeah.
They just go. They just go.
Possums are so matter of fact.
Yeah, they just go. They eat everything. But
Yeah.
I can imagine. So then when you get like adults that are injured, did you have to do a lot of vet care for them or use veterinarians?
Yes, this is one of the things. If you're especially with birds, you have to, well, not, I mean, with all with all wildlife, you need to work with veterinarians. And because as rehabbers, unless there are veterinarians who are also rehabbers, but really, if you're a working veterinarian, there aren't enough hours in the day for you to be both. So in my own case, I had a couple of just amazingly wonderful vets, small animal vets, who were willing to work with me on wildlife. And they would schedule me in. And if a bird had a broken bone, they would x-ray it, they would set it. I had an owl come in once with an eye injury, and I called a veterinarian who specialized in animal eyes, and he saw this bird. I mean, normally he's a high-paid veterinarian, and he saw this bird for free several times, just because he wanted to help, and this was a cool project for him. But the vet, I mean, I just can't say enough wonderful things about the vets that I've worked with, because I wouldn't have been able to do what I did without them. I don't have an x-ray machine. I can't set a broken bone properly. So.
Yeah, and it's expensive.
Yeah, this is why rehabbers are always broke. We have no money.
I know. It's like, and then you have to make some hard decisions sometimes.
That's right. Like, do I get that really nice dress I have my eye on, or do I spend it on bandages and frozen rats? Well, let's see.
Let's see. Oh, that dress doesn't. Yeah, save it for the frozen rats.
Yeah, right. Oh man.
So, going back to Unflappable real quick. What are some of the things that people will take away from that story that you think? Besides just some of the things they might learn about wildlife rehab. I mean, we talked a little bit about that, but is there anything else that they might be surprised about?
I think they would probably just be surprised at how all-encompassing it can become. How you keep learning new things, and they will probably also be surprised at the network and at the bond that wildlife rehabbers have with each other, because there really aren't that many wildlife rehabbers. I mean, the money is terrible. I mean, we usually people would put it this way: you don't become a wildlife rehabber for the money or the glamour,
No.
So, but so when you're in a situation like that, and when you're, rehabbers are stressed out a lot. We have too much work and not enough time. And there are these wonderful, wonderful moments when you take an animal or a bird who was definitely a goner, and you essentially bring them back to life and then set them free. And that moment is so it just makes your heart sing. It just does something for your soul. And that is enough to keep you going. And, when you have a bond with people who feel the same way that you do about this, it's a really strong bond. And I think this story just shows how, people will do so much for each other, especially when they think they're on the person is on a quest, on a mission that is for the life of a wild creature.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the best moments is when you see those animals go run away, and brings tears to your eyes sometimes, and you're like, no, I still remember this huge possum I released. We called him Banjo.
Oh.
And he just, I mean, they don't run away. They just walk away.
Saunter away.
Yeah, and they're like, whatever, I don't care about you. I'm just going to go find some food.
I know that's the thing that is hard for some people to understand, is when we have these animals and birds in rehab, you cannot get, you're not supposed to get them to like you. I mean, that's that would be, if they liked you by the time you set them free, then you would not be doing your job properly. You want to make it so that they are set to go. And there have been times, like when I worked at the Raptor Center, sometimes if we were going to release a big bird, we would invite a little group of people who had helped or, been involved. It's not so good to have a huge crowd, because the more people there are, the greater the chance of something going wrong. But you let a bird go, and just like you said, you look around and people are like weeping, and it's so symbolic and it's so beautiful. But this bird just hot foots it away from you. It's not like they circle around and blow you a kiss or anything. They just off they go. Like, sayonara.
I know. There's actually the Pacific Mammal Center near where I live. As soon as this COVID-19 thing is lifted, go work with them. But they do releases on the ocean. I can only imagine. Can you imagine seeing all these seals? They get like 20, 30 baby seals and release them all at once.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Oh gosh, a lot of tears at that one. I bet.
Yeah.
So, I guess, what are some of the misunderstandings? Because I'm sure a lot of people didn't really understand wildlife rehab, or that even was a thing.
Yeah.
Where people could get involved. I guess, what are some of the truths or misnomers out there about wildlife rehabilitation?
It's easier to do it than say it, right?
Exactly.
I think people think that rehabbers are like Snow White, and we have all these happy animals just getting along and circling our heads, and a peaceable kingdom. And of course, it's not a peaceable kingdom. If I have different species of birds in my clinic, the raptors would be delighted to eat the songbirds. I mean, these are not creatures who would get along. And I think you're right that I have had so many times where people have said, well, what's a wildlife rehabber? What is that? And it's nice to be able to tell people that rehabbers exist. There is a place to take an injured wild creature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, obviously our listeners of our podcast love wildlife. What would you do to suggest if they wanted to get into wildlife rehab?
I would suggest they go online and find the rehabber that's closest to them, and ask if they could volunteer. There are single rehabbers who could use a hand every now and then. There are rehab centers that can use volunteers, anytime. Depending on what you'd like to do for them. Especially with the big centers, there are so many different jobs that you can do depending on how hands-on you want to be. It helps if you have some kind of, background in the animal care, especially if you're, science oriented. That's always helpful. But I'd say contact the rehabber nearest you, and most of them are really eager for help. And even if you can only do it every, once in a while, and even if you just want to say transport, I know people who they can only do it every once in a while, and they don't necessarily want to be hands-on with an injured animal, but they want to help. So I have their numbers, and whenever an animal is injured, say somebody has an injured squirrel, and they have it in a box, and they need to get it to me, but they can't drive it to me. I can call this person and say, can you go to wherever it is, pick up the squirrel and bring it to me? And they're happy to do that. So
yeah,
there's just so many different things you can do. especially give money.
Yes.
You can give money and supplies.
They need it. They need
Yes.
it. Yes. You go through so much so quickly.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's a labor of love. So I guess some of the final questions I want to ask: how many different birds have you worked with, and what are some of your favorites?
Oh, I have I have worked with so many different birds. I mean, just although the ones that live in my area, I do the native birds that are in my area. So I'm in New York State, and I do New York State birds. I've never done a pelican. I've never done a
Hmm.
frigate
Hmm.
bird, anything like that. But I've I've had I've had birds brought to me that when they come in a box, I can't even ID them. I remember a man once brought me this little creature in a box, and he said I'm so happy. He was just such a kind and elegant man, and he said,
Hmm.
I'm so happy that you could help. Could you tell me what sort of bird this is? And I was really fried at the time. I was underslept and overworked. I said,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
don't, it looks like someone threw it out of a spaceship. I don't know what it is. And I had to, I had to take a picture of it and send it to one of my birder friends. And it was a nestling green heron.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, it was such a cool little bird, but this is learning on the fly. And
Hmm.
I did not know the care for them. So I called my friends who do a lot of shorebirds, water birds, who specialize them. There's a place in Maine. I was such a pest. I called them all the time. I said, I have to get all these little details. I'd say, I'm really sorry, it's me again, but how do I do this? And
Oh yeah, I'm sure
yeah.
they were happy to help.
Oh, so yes, yes. They were wonderful and happy to help.
Right. So you've been doing this for a while. Just a couple months ago, or it's like it's 3 months ago, 4 months ago, this study came out that we've lost what 3 million or 3 billion. Was it 3 billion birds in the last 50 years? Have you seen a decline? Have you noticed anything, or just I guess are you hearing anything from your circles in wildlife rehab?
Yes, yes, I am. I hear, I don't, live in sort of a rural area.
Hmm.
And in my treks through the woods, I haven't really seen it myself, but it's true that birds are declining. There's so many things that are against them. There's building habitat loss is an enormous factor. Um, they there's too much building. There's not enough land for them. Every time people cut down the woods and put up another suburb, they have less habitat. Grasslands are disappearing. Um, there's there are things, outdoor cats. I mean,
Hmm.
don't get me started on outdoor cats,
Yes, yes.
because they just kill so many birds, and people make excuses for them, like, oh, it's natural, and it's not. Cats are domestic and wild birds are not. So there's that. And there's just there's so many things that are against them. And the laws, I mean, laws in this country protecting wildlife are just being shredded every single day. Every time I look at the paper, another environmental regulation has bitten the dust. And these are things that people have worked really, really hard to enact. It's been such a long battle, and then with the flick of a pen, they're gone.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's well, I know there's people out there fighting. We interviewed actually a lawyer last year with the Center for Biological Diversity
oh yeah, yeah,
and Brett Hartle, and they're fighting. But again, there's so few those lawyers out there doing this work. So it's good to so somebody like you out there working hard, saving these birds. For anybody listening to this interview, buy her book, help support birds in North America. So there you go. There's your plug.
There you have it. Yes. And, I don't do so much rehab anymore because I'm busy writing. And I don't live in the house where I had my bird rehab center. And, you need facilities for this. I still do rescues. People still have my number. So once they get your number, they'll always have it. So if someone has an injured bird, I can go and get him and stabilize him, keep him overnight if I have to, and then pass him on to another rehabber. But I've found that, I can do that as far as hands-on, but I can reach a lot more people if I keep writing about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. It's the animals need it. Our wildlife need it. Obviously that's what our podcast is about. And, each week we talk about a species, and someone like yourself, this is what has kept us going as far as the good news or the good felt stories are people like you out there helping these animals day in, day out, spreading awareness or doing the rehab or the research and all this stuff. So thank you so much, Suzie, for what you do.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on your show. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. So final question, I guess, besides buying your book, Unflappable, which we'll put all the links on there.
Okay.
Your website, SuzieGilbert.com. Again, we'll have that on our show notes and on the links there. Is there any other way our listeners can help spread your message, what you're doing, or help out with wildlife rehab?
I would say, social media. If you see things on social media that have to do with wildlife, social media is such a powerful thing. I have been dragged into it, kicking and screaming, because I'm not I didn't grow up with the social media. I'm not that generation. So, but it's such a wonderful tool to help spread the word about things. When you see things on social media that have to do with the environment, just forward them around. Keep forwarding that information. And if you're into birds, especially if you're into bird watching, there's a wonderful site that I used to write for. It's called 10,000 Birds. Just go 10,000birds.com. And there are a whole bunch of writers on it. They travel, well, not so much these days, but before, they would travel all over the world and write about the cool birds that they've seen. And when I was writing for them, I did the rehabber corner. So I just wrote about rehab, but it's still going. And I keep trying to get back to writing for them again. I just haven't been able to get there yet, but it's there on, online. And these stories are wonderful. They have beautiful pictures. They have great stories to get you into birds, to, show you the adventure of watching birds and, becoming a conservation-minded person.
Yes.
That's the
goal, right?
That's the goal. I have one story for you that I just thought of that kind of encompasses like what happens to rehabbers. You know how when you start doing something and then it seems like say suddenly you take an interest in a certain type of car and suddenly they're everywhere. You keep looking at them. I once was I was in my house. I was running my bird operation, and I had a half an hour to spare. You had asked me about my typical day when I was trying to juggle my kids and my birds and everything, and I had a half an hour to spare, and I was just guarding this half an hour because I was going to go running. I was going to take a run in the woods, and it was such a stress buster for me to go running. And I was so happy. And I got everything together, and I called my dog, and I went out and I crossed the field. I was literally about 6 feet from the trail, and a yellow shafted flicker fell on my head. Literally. Literally,
Wow.
he fell out of the tree, out of the sky, and hit my head and bounced off my shoulder and fell on the ground. And then he started kind of trying to scuttle away, but obviously he was injured. So I grabbed him, and he had a broken wing. So anyway, it's like, these birds are going to demand to be rescued, even if you prefer to do something else.
You had no free time.
No.
Oh, but that's the life. I mean, that's what makes, I mean, let me just say thank you for saving that animal. I mean, that is the dedication that you had, the heart you have. Well, amazing stuff, Suzie.
Hey, well, you've done it yourself, Chris. You're part of my tribe, even though you managed to escape for a while.
A little while.
Yes.
One of these days.
We'll probably get you back like the mafia.
I know. I'm going to go do the SEALs. I'm definitely going to go volunteer there when I can.
Well, when you do, put it online so we all can watch.
I will. But Suzie, thank you so much. The book is Unflappable. Please go get it. It's on Amazon, right? And
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Smashwords, wherever you want to get your books.
Yeah, wherever you want to buy books, they're there.
Yep. Your local, if you want to support your local bookstore, you can order it through the bookstore.
Oh, good. There you go. So Suzie Gilbert, thank you so much. Good luck on the book, and thank you for spending the last hour with us.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a really fun time.